China quietly became the world's energy superpower, and you probably didn't even notice it happening. While everyone was watching tech giants and space races, China was building something far more powerful: total control over the energy that will run the 21st century. They don't just make solar panels and batteries. They own the entire supply chain, from raw earth to finished power. And they've done it at a scale that's almost impossible to comprehend. This is the story of how one nation seized control of humanity's energy future. But it all started with a material most people have never even heard of. In the early 2000s, making a solar panel required one critical material: polysilicon. It's refined from quartz, purified to 99.9999%, and it's what turns sunlight into electricity. Back then, German and American companies controlled polysilicon production. China made cheap panels, but they had to buy the expensive core material from the West. That was the choke point. That was the weakness. Then, China did something audacious. They built polysilicon factories at a pace nobody thought possible. Not one or two, dozens. Massive facilities in Xinjiang and Inner Mongolia, where land was cheap and power was abundant. By 2010, they'd matched Western production. By 2015, they'd doubled it. Today, China produces over 80% of the world's polysilicon. They took the one ingredient they didn't control and turned it into a total monopoly. But controlling the raw material was only step one. They had to own the entire chain. So they built wafer production facilities, cell manufacturing plants, and module assembly lines, all in integrated clusters. A single Chinese province could take raw quartz and output finished solar panels without a single component leaving the region. They vertically integrated the entire industry, while Western companies were still outsourcing and optimizing. The scale was terrifying. By 2020, China was producing over 75% of all solar panels on Earth. They made solar power cheap enough for every nation to afford, but every nation had to buy from them. But here's where it gets devastating. It wasn't just about being cheaper. Chinese manufacturers drove prices so low that Western competitors couldn't survive. German solar companies that pioneered the technology went bankrupt. American factories shut down. The few that remained needed government subsidies just to keep the lights on. China had weaponized scale, and they'd won. Then they turned their attention to something even bigger: wind. Europe was supposed to own wind power forever. Denmark's Vestas had been perfecting turbines since the 1980s. Germany's Siemens had the engineering pedigree. Spain's Gamesa had installations across 3 continents. They'd spent decades building expertise, filing patents, establishing themselves as the undisputed leaders of wind energy. The technology was European, the market was European, the future was supposed to be European. Then China looked at that future and decided to take it. In 2008, Chinese wind turbine manufacturers were nobodies. Basement-level players, making cheap knockoffs of European designs. The gap wasn't small, it was enormous. European turbines were standing over 300 feet tall, with blades longer than a football field, each one a masterpiece of engineering. Chinese versions were crude, unreliable, almost laughable. What China had was something more dangerous than expertise: a massive domestic market and zero patience. The Chinese government mandated enormous wind farm installations across Inner Mongolia, Gansu, and coastal provinces. Tens of thousands of turbines needed, and needed fast. But here's the devastating catch. They required a certain percentage of those turbines to be domestically produced. Foreign companies could compete for those lucrative contracts, but only if they shared their technology and partnered with Chinese firms. European companies saw billions in potential revenue. They took the deal. And China absorbed every single lesson. Within 5 years, Chinese manufacturers weren't just copying turbines, they were innovating them. Goldwind, Mingyang, Envision Energy, names you'd never heard, became industry giants. They built turbines that could handle the brutal sandstorms of the Gobi Desert, offshore models that could withstand Pacific typhoons, and they built them for 30% less than their European teachers. European manufacturers watched their market share collapse. By 2020, China wasn't just the largest installer of wind power. They manufactured over half the world's wind turbines. They'd gone from laughable imitators to industry leaders in 12 years. But turbines and solar panels just generate power. The real revolution was in capturing it. Batteries were supposed to be Japan's domain, then South Korea's triumph. Panasonic and Sony pioneered lithium-ion technology. LG Chem and Samsung SDI perfected it for consumer electronics. They had the research labs, the manufacturing precision, the global brand trust. When electric vehicles started gaining traction in the 2010s, everyone assumed these Asian tech giants would supply the batteries that powered them. China had other plans. In 2011, a company called CATL was founded in a coastal city most people couldn't find on a map. Contemporary Amperex Technology Limited. At the time, they were making batteries for consumer electronics, small-time stuff, nothing that suggested they'd become the most important energy company you've never heard of. But China's government had identified batteries as the choke point of the entire energy transition. Solar panels and wind turbines were useless without a way to store their power. Electric vehicles were fantasies without batteries to run them. Whoever controlled battery production would control the future of transportation and renewable energy itself. So they flooded the industry with subsidies, low-interest loans, and guaranteed domestic demand. Cattle exploded. By 2017, they'd become the world's largest EV battery manufacturer, not through some technological breakthrough. Through relentless scaling and vertical integration, they built gigafactories that dwarfed anything Tesla or Panasonic had imagined. Facilities producing batteries at a volume that made everyone else's operations look like hobby projects. Then came BYD, Build Your Dreams. They started as a battery company in 1995, then moved into electric vehicles, then back to batteries with scale that stunned the industry. They weren't just supplying car companies. They were becoming one, producing their own electric vehicles with their own batteries, cutting out every middleman. By 2022, Chinese companies controlled nearly 80% of global battery cell production. CATL alone had more manufacturing capacity than all Western battery makers combined. Every Tesla, every Ford electric truck, every Volkswagen EV relied on Chinese battery cells or Chinese battery materials. But here's where it gets truly devastating. China doesn't even mine most of the lithium that goes into these batteries. Australia and South America do. But China refines 60% of the world's lithium and processes nearly 90% of the rare earth materials batteries require. They don't need to own the mines. They own the refineries that turn raw ore into usable materials, cobalt from the Congo, graphite from Mozambique, nickel from Indonesia. It all flows to China for processing, then emerges as battery cells that power the world. And they weren't stopping at vehicle batteries. Electric cars were just the visible part. The real power was in something most people never think about: grid-scale energy storage. Massive battery installations, the size of warehouses that store energy from solar farms and wind turbines, then release it when the sun sets and the wind dies. Without these systems, renewable energy is unreliable. With them, it becomes the backbone of entire power grids. China saw this before anyone else did. While Western countries were still debating the economics of grid storage, China was building it at incomprehensible scale. They installed more grid battery capacity in 2023 alone than the United States had built in its entire history. Not because they had better technology, because they had the factories, the materials, and the will to move faster than physics should allow. CATL and BYD pivoted from vehicle batteries to utility-scale systems. They built standardized container units packed with battery cells that could be deployed anywhere. A solar farm in California, Chinese batteries storing the power. A wind installation in Australia, Chinese storage systems smoothing out the fluctuations. A remote island trying to go fully renewable, China had the solution, and they could deliver it in months instead of years. The numbers became absurd. By 2024, China had over 70 gigawatt-hours of grid storage capacity installed or under construction. The entire European Union had less than 15. The United States was struggling to reach 20. China had built more energy storage in 5 years than the rest of the world combined. But the batteries were only half the equation. They needed something to power, so China built the renewable infrastructure itself at a scale that defies comprehension. They constructed the world's largest solar farm in Xinjiang, 3,000 square miles of photovoltaic panels stretching across desert that used to be worthless. That's an area larger than the state of Delaware, covered entirely in solar panels. It generates 6 gigawatts of power, enough electricity to power 6 million homes. One installation producing more energy than entire nations consume. They erected offshore wind installations in the Yellow Sea with turbines standing over 400 feet tall. Each blade sweeps an area of 56,000 square feet as it rotates. That's larger than a football field slicing through the air with every revolution. These machines generate 15 megawatts each. A single turbine powers 15,000 homes, and China built thousands of them. Then there's the Three Gorges Dam, the largest hydroelectric power station ever constructed. It's 1.4 miles long, 600 feet tall, and holds back a reservoir that stretches for 400 miles. This single structure displaced over 1 million people during construction and generates 22 gigawatts of electricity. That's enough power to replace burning 50 million tons of coal every single year. The dam produces more electricity than 20 nuclear power plants, one piece of infrastructure generating nearly 3% of China's entire electricity supply. These aren't just power plants. They're monuments to industrial capability that reshape geography itself.